G'day everyone. Thought I'd talk to you today about the Godox systems that are available. Now I'm going to discuss this. I found this amazing article by Robert Hall and I thought I'd take you through that, and I'll put you the links down below so you can actually check his whole article out and also have a look at his videos that he's put on YouTube. But I thought I'd talk about it from my perspective of not knowing much about Godox at all and going through this article and then sort of explaining which one I would actually choose, because I thought you might find that interesting. Being my Speedlights Sony, I'm using the latest Sony Speedlights, and also for my larger flashes I'm using the Pro Photo system. So I thought I'd talk to you about looking at this system from someone that doesn't know much about it at all, and I'll sort of explain about the way I read it and the features that I think are actually good and which one of these probably would interest me if I was purchasing as well. And I thought that might help you seeing it from the side of someone that doesn't really know much about the Godox system at all. So I just thought I'd take you through that document. So let's have a look at the actual document itself. And like I said, I'll stick these in the link down below so you can have a look at them. And this article is just talking about Godox Demystified, and Robert's written this amazing tutorial about it here as well, and like I said, he also has a couple of videos that goes through it as well. But like I said, I thought I'd talk about it from my perspective, coming from as a user that doesn't know it very well. So these basically are all the systems that are there. So it's sort of showing you down here that what's available if you're looking at them. There are quite a lot. And that's where I think it confused a lot of people that are just coming into the photography. They're not certain about which flash to get and what features are important and things like that. So I thought that I'd take you through all of those together. This is the video that you can watch, which is complete guide to 2018. So you can also have a look, obviously, what he's saying. But I thought I'd talk about it from my perspective with you all. Now, if we're going down, the first thing that he's discussing here is transmitters. And I've noticed here that there's three transmitters that they're saying are offered. And it's basically the Godox XT X1T, the Godox XT32, and the Godox X Pro. Now, a couple of things about this one. So this obviously is the base version here. You can see that this one has a hot shoe. Now, what it means by a hot shoe is that you can stick this onto your actual camera itself, and then you can put an actual strobe on the top. So basically it's just having another one sitting directly on the top. So you don't have to use, you can use this whole system and have a strobe on board as well if you wanted to go that way. Or if you also wanted to, say, have a light attached or something like that on there, you could as well, an LCD, something like that, because you have got something to hold it on the top. Clearly these other two don't have that, so these are sitting on their own, and you can only use these with the off-camera flashes that we'll talk about. You've got 5 groups in this. Now that means that you can have 5 separate groups with different power on each group, so that's a really handy thing to have as well. They all tend to have 5 groups. I'm not sure about the Godox X Pro. It doesn't say on there about how many groups that it has, but 5 groups is obviously not more than enough. I very rarely ever go over 3. And sometimes that could be that you've got a key light, you have a main fill, and then you might have a hair light for separation, something like that. So it's good to have different groups on there, and then you can obviously control the power separately for each one of those groups. So that's a really handy thing as well. This does have TTL and HSS. And it's got no legacy grips. I'm not certain what that means, but this one has no hot shoe, obviously. It's got a better wheel. In other words, this one is easier to actually use because it's ergonomically much better. But this one has no TTL, so I wouldn't recommend to be buying this Godox XT32 at all, because basically TTL means it's going to get the exposure for you with the flash and the ambient and everything balanced fairly close right from the start. And that's why you really wouldn't want to go for that, because this has no TTL at all. Now that's fine if you want to shoot manual flash. That's quite good if that's the way you only go. Now I tend to shoot TTL for my first exposure just to get an initial exposure, and that's the important thing I want to sort of stress here, is that when I'm shooting I'll nearly always use TTL, get a base exposure and have a look at that, and then I'll turn that off, and then I'll go manual from that point. But the TTL just gives me an initial exposure that gets you within that ballpark. So I think it's an important thing to have that TTL on board. So obviously the Godox XT32 doesn't have that, so you can't use TTL there. The one that I'd recommend, obviously, is this one, the Godox X Pro. It does have the nicest design, and it's very similar, actually. This is the other ProPhoto unit that I'm using, but it's very similar to the ProPhoto Air unit that I use, you know, with your hot shoe that's on the bottom, and then it just sticks on your camera nicely, and everything's nice and easy to actually get to. The good part about this is it does have HSS and TTL. Now, HSS means high-speed sync. Now, why that's important is because if you don't, excuse me, if you don't have HSS, that's the amount that your camera can sync up with your camera, the flash. Now, normally you're limited to 250th of a second, and that's no good if you wanted to overpower the sun, for instance. So to have HSS, what that does, it enables you to have a much higher shutter speed. Therefore, you can overpower the sun. So you might want to work, say, at 1/4000th of a second, and then your flash will still work. Yes, it does lose power because it has this strobing effect that it has when you're using HSS, but at least you have the ability to overpower the sun and get past that 1/250th of a second sync speed problem. So I would recommend that you definitely go for this one because you get HSS and TTL. This cheaper one does also have TTL and HSS, but it just doesn't have the same design and the ergonomics that this one has there. So I suppose if you wanted to go cheaply, you could use this, but I would honestly prefer to just buy this one, which has a much better ergonomically design. The screen on the top can tell you what your exposure is a lot easier without you having to sort of lift the camera up and chimp, and all your dials are very easy access, so it seems to have that it's much better. The only thing it doesn't have, I suppose, is the hot shoe, but neither does my ProPhoto units either. So they're the actual transmitters. Now they're what sits on top of your camera, and then you'll obviously need a flash or some system that will connect to. So these are what they call the transceivers down here. Now, transceivers are your flash, your strobe, or whatever you'd like to call it. Now, there's a number of different units on here, and this is where a lot of people get confused. And like I said, I don't know Godox, so I thought I'd look at this as a new user and sort of explain about which one I would go out of these. It doesn't necessarily always have to be the most powerful one. You just have to look at what features are offered for each unit. Now, the first one that we'll look at is the TT350. This takes AA batteries. Now that can be an advantage because you can change them whenever you want to. I've noticed over here that the V850 has the Li-ion batteries, or the Li-ion batteries. Now that's great because they will sync much faster if you're dealing with this type of battery there. There'll be no problem with it shooting fast, like if you're in a wedding and you want to just keep firing the flash off. Anything with a lithium-ion battery will give you another flash much faster than one that uses AA batteries. The issue is, though, if you don't have a spare, you can't just throw AA batteries in, or if you're traveling and you can't charge those batteries up, you could be in trouble. So sometimes having AA batteries is an advantage. I think I would tend to go for this lithium-ion battery, though, because they do resync much faster and they'll flash off much quicker. You don't have to wait for it before you can shoot again. So I'd probably be tending to go that way. Even the cheapest one does TTL and HSS, so that's fantastic. That's great. And this is the mini version, which means it's quite small, obviously. The TT60 also takes AA batteries, but this one doesn't have TTL, and it has no HS on the camera. Now, when it says no HSS on the camera, so high-speed sync is not available if you're running that sitting on the camera hot shoe. It will work if you connect it with one of these transmitters and then shoot it off camera, so you can get that and it will work with high-speed sync. But you won't get high-speed sync with that if it's on camera, so that could be an issue for you. So I wouldn't recommend that because sometimes I do use high-speed sync on the camera, so I probably wouldn't be getting anything that will not give me HSS on the camera. Now, this is a full-size flash, it says. The V852 obviously has the better battery internal, but it doesn't have TTL and no HSS on camera, but it is a full-size camera. So again, I wouldn't recommend to use this because this has no TTL and it also has no HSS. Like I said, I love TTL for getting that initial exposure, or sometimes if I'm doing run and gun, I will use TTL as well. For instance, if I'm in a wedding and I just don't have the time, like we really have to move fast and I don't have the time to keep checking exposure, I'll just use TTL, and the exposure will be fairly close, and I can just shoot in aperture mode and then just use the exposure compensation to basically fix the flash or exposure compensation, and it'll be fairly good fairly quickly. But I don't tend to shoot that way very often. I do like to have full control, and like I said, I tend to shoot with TTL on, and then I'll turn TTL on and go manual. So I probably wouldn't recommend either of the top three. The first one's okay if you wanted to go minimalistic and be very small, because it does have HSS and it also has TTL. The other two don't on camera, so I probably wouldn't recommend them. The V350 also has a lithium-ion battery. It also has TTL and HSS, and this is also a mini version. So if you did want to travel quite light, that seems like it would be quite a good battery. Again, though, you do have to be aware that if you haven't got spare lithium-ion batteries and you haven't got the facility to charge them, you may want to have a backup that has AA batteries just in case, so that no matter where you are, you could just throw some AA batteries in. And it may be something that you'd want to consider if you're thinking about that. The TT685 does have AA batteries. It also does TTL and HSS. Now this is a full-size flash, so in other words you get a much bigger screen. So it just depends really on whether you want to travel lighter or full size. Now obviously I think, and this is what I'm not understanding, you can let me know down below too, the power rating of the minis probably is less than what the full size one will be. I would think the guide number, which means the amount of power that these can put out, would be larger on their full size flashes, and someone may be able to help me down below to let me know what the guide numbers are for these flashes. The V860 is also a lithium-ion battery. It has TTL, HSS and full size. Now I'm not certain what the difference is between the TT685 and the V860. Perhaps it's just a bit of a more powerful model. This is where I'm saying I'm coming from a user that doesn't understand the system, and I'm thinking about what is the difference between these two flashes. I may look that up a little bit later and just have a look about what the difference is here. But looking at both of these, actually it may just be that it's got the lithium-ion battery, so it would flash faster. It basically, you'd be able to shoot one-to-one much quicker without waiting. In other words, you may have to wait, say, 2 seconds on the TT685. This one you might have to only wait 1 second between shots. So that's probably what the difference is between the two there, looking at what that's actually saying. So if you want to keep shooting and you're in a situation where you're shooting weddings and you want to fire off multiple flashes, you obviously would be better with a V862 due to having that ability to flash much quicker. What else is it saying? Now, there's another one over here. Oh, by the way, both of these have TTL and HSS, and they're both full size. So it's only the battery, I think, that's different in those two. You can get the AD362. That's a much more powerful unit if you want to go that way. And it even has a hot shoe, so it can be used on the cam like a Speedlight if you want to. But clearly, if you're going to be dealing with this, you are going to be lugging around this battery pack as a separate unit. But again, it would flash very fast. There'd be no waiting for it to power up again. So that would be a fantastic thing. Also, it would put out much power. I think looking at the head that's on this, it would throw the light out much wider and therefore it would be much softer. But you're dealing in a much bigger unit, excuse me, than what you're dealing with these on-camera flashes. I think the way that I would go, though, I wouldn't be using this type of system. I'd be then going to a strobe, which we'll look at in a minute, more of the actual larger units as well. But if you're running and gunning and you want to work fast, this may be a good solution as well. But I think I'd probably go for an AD200 if I was going to go down this avenue. So that's the actual flash, the units themselves, the Speedlights. So let's go down and just have a look. And it's saying recycle times are the issue between using the AA batteries, and that's what they're saying here, that AA batteries, the recycle time will be much slower than if you're using the lithium-ion batteries. So that's sort of what he's talking about there, which is what I've mentioned too in that article. So let's go down now and look at these larger units. Now, there's obviously the AD600 and there's the AD600 Pro and there's the Godox AD200. And there's also now the 400, which I'll show you in a minute, that's sort of in between the 200 and the 600 Pro. If we look at what's on these, if you're wondering about what you'd buy in this case, basically they have, I'm pretty sure, well, the first one only has a Bowens mount, and I think you can buy adapters for these other two that you can put, say, Pro Photo units on there. They have adapters that you can connect and use whatever you'd like, I believe, on the newer units, the AD600 Pro. But they do have an attachable battery. This first one, though, the AD600, they're saying it's quite heavy. Now, it's got a 2-second recycle time, and you get 500 1-to-1 flashes, so it's quite slow looking at that. That light obviously would be no good if you were working in a scenario where you had to fire off the flash very, very quickly. So that's something that you'd have to consider. Now, the cheaper one doesn't have TTL, so that's another thing, and they don't have HSS. You have to get the AD600B, and that added TTL. But looking at that, it still doesn't have HSS. So that's something you'd have to consider if you wanted to go down that line. So clearly, if you wanted to use that light, you'd then have to start using NDs to basically lower your shutter speed so you could go within your flash sync speed of 1/250th. The AD600 Pro, it says it's got an improved head. Now, it's got a 1-second recycle time, so it's much faster than using the AD600 BM, and it's got improved color accuracy. It's also got TTL and HSS, and it's got a brighter LED. Now, that's important because the LED I use all the time, because if you're dealing, say, late in the day, in the evening or whatever, and you can't see and your camera can have trouble focusing, you can use the LED to get that focus. So that's a really important thing to consider. And it says it's got a brighter LED, and this will give you less flashes though. It's 360. But again, remember that's shooting at 1-to-1. Very rarely do we ever shoot 1-to-1 unless you're really doing high-speed sync stuff. So you're not shooting 1-to-1 very often at all. So 360 flashes is probably going to last you the day if you're dealing with using it as a normal flash, where you very rarely will, on a 600, even go to half power. You're probably using quarter of power most of the time, or even less than that. But again, this will recycle at 1 second, which is very fast. It has TTL and HSS as well, and these will still work with those same transmitters that you looked at earlier. And it seems like a really good unit, actually. The Godox AD200, and that's the one that I said I would probably purchase over this AD360. I think that probably would be a great flash if you're dealing with working quickly and you wanted to travel very light. It might be that you even want to carry a couple of these, because I noticed you can get adapters, and I saw that down below that you can use as well. This has 3 times the power of a Speedlight, so you're carrying, in other words, it's like carrying 3 of those high-end Speedlights that you were looking at before. So it's like you're carrying 3 of these type of units in the one unit, which is fantastic. So it seems like it's very good in that aspect. It has a Fresnel bare bulb, so I think that means it's focusable. The other thing too, it says it's very small factor, it's got an internal lithium battery, and it does do TTL and HSS. So that's a great advantage there too, that you have got now TTL and HSS on that unit as well. And I did notice down here that it's saying here, I think this is the AD400 Pro that's just released. This is probably the one that would interest me if I was going to get some of these units. Now, I did have a discussion before about that. This will also have TTL and HSS, but I do like the way it has all these adapters. This is very pro photo-ish, the way that you can put the grids on and things like that. It looks like a really nice unit. Looking at these down here, the reason why I'm saying I'd probably go for the 400 personally is I shoot with the ProPhoto B1s. Now, they're 500 power watts. So if I tend to often use that power if I'm dealing with HSS or using big modifiers, I'd probably tend to find that the AD200 wouldn't be enough for me. So therefore, I think if I was buying, and remember this is a personal choice, I would probably buy the AD400 as the lighter flash that I would use, and then I'd also have an AD600 Pro if I really needed to overpower the sun. Now, if you had the money then, and you could also get the Godox AD200 if you wanted to work very, very quickly. They might be fantastic for, say, a wedding scenario where you're moving very fast. You don't want to travel or lug around too much gear. Having a couple of the AD200s might be a fantastic way to go. If I was working in a more slow, methodical way, I'd probably go with the AD600 Pro or the AD400 due to the fact of using bigger modifiers and having that power to overpower the sun. Yes, you could use two AD200s to do that, but I'd probably tend to use those larger units. And, you know, I just sort of wanted to sort of give it from my perspective about how I would go and what I'd purchase on these, because you may find that interesting coming from a user that doesn't know much about these units either. Compared to, say, using Godox, using Profoto, which is what I've done. And like I said, this document's a really great document. I'll leave this in the link below so you can get to have a look at his video on YouTube, because clearly he's great and what he does is fantastic, so have a look there. I just wanted to give it as a different perspective about reading it from my perspective of not knowing how the whole system actually works. So let me know in the comments down below what you think about what I've said. Am I about right what I'm saying? I'll be curious to know what you think about it, especially the people that are already using Godox, or if you're thinking about going into Godox, have I helped you sort of make a decision on which way you'd like to go? That's all, guys, for now. I'll see you all again soon for the next video. Bye for now.